We don't talk about money or sex in America.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Money-ish Show. And on this episode, I got a really cool guy that actually probably can give me some advice today on how to build out my podcast that we got here. And Travis has done over 500 episodes on his podcast. And a cool background was he just went after some really, really big names, which most of you guys are doing podcasts, you're trying to build your brand. You want to know how to get those big, big names like Grant Cardone and Tret Chilton and Tom Ballou. And this guy went and did it. And so we're going to talk to him about it. But more importantly, once he found out how to do it, he created a platform that I want to show you guys, especially those that are trying to build a brand called Guestio. And it's a great freaking way for you to build your podcast without having to do all the legwork that he put into it, building his. So I'm going to talk to you about that as well. Travis, welcome to the show.
Andrew, thanks, man.
Glad to have you on it, man.
Happy to be here.
And I interview a ton of straight, what I call business people, nonstop, right?
Yeah.
And I'm more excited to interview brand building, content creators, social media people like yourself. Probably because maybe has a little bit more in line to do with what I do now.
Yeah.
And but you built this brand business called Guestio.
Yes.
Before I get into that, I want to back up a little bit here, and I want to talk a little bit about back me up to when maybe you were a kid.
Sure, yeah.
Did you grow up as an entrepreneur household? How'd you grow up?
You know, it's kind of interesting because, and we talked about this a little bit off camera, I won't go too much into it, but I grew up kind of in a really strictly religious bubble, and but my dad was in the real estate space.
Okay.
And so when I was a kid, I was at church all the time, and the school that I went to was also on the same church campus. It was very much a bubble. But then on the weekends, I would go on caravans, is what they call them, where my dad would go look at all the open houses of people in the the and all that
open
stuff.
House caravan,
Yeah, so we would go on those, and because I could get a donut if I went with him. So that was always a good time. So at the time I was a little kid, I was walking properties and things like that. But in terms of the entrepreneurial side, I don't remember much of if my parents pushed me toward that as much as like kind of fostered it when they saw little glimpses of it here and there.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember these things, but there was it was like a creepy crawly machine thing.
Okay.
That it was kind of like the boy version of the Easy Bake Ovens, because my sister was like 18 months older than me, so I wanted to be like her or whatever.
Sure.
So she got an Easy Bake Oven. But my parents didn't get me an Easy Bake Oven. They got me this like creepy crawler maker, So I started making these little bugs and taking them to school and selling them to the other kids, when I was in like 4th or 5th grade or whatever. So I always kind of had the itch, and I think it was just honestly, I liked money. I just liked having a little bit of money to spend. When we went to Walmart, I wanted to be able to buy the, Max Steel action figure or whatever it was at the time, So I just did little things here and there like that. And I think my parents did a pretty good job of fostering the spirit of entrepreneurship in terms of like, they always, if I wanted to go buy something that I couldn't afford, they would give me work to do.
Okay.
Instead of just saying like, oh, here's $50, go buy it. It was like, well, we got 2 acres and there's always weeds. So go weed. I'll pay you $5 an hour, which I'm pretty sure is against some sort of child labor law or something.
For sure.
But that's what it was, and that's what I did. So I think it kind of taught me at an early age that if you work, you get reward for the work. And then by the time I was in high school, I was like, this pulling weeds for $5 an hour thing isn't super great. So I started a landscaping company with a buddy of mine, and we started just mowing lawns and putting in odd jobs for like real estate investors and flippers and things like that. And then took that into college, and I was going to school full time, and was going to be actually in the ministry, because I went to the same religious bubble that I grew up in. I went to the college that was on the same campus that I went to the school and church at. And so when I was in college, I didn't really have any thoughts of entrepreneurship or business after college. It was just kind of a way that I was making money during school.
Okay.
But then a buddy of mine started doing door-to-door sales.
Okay.
And started pulling some decent checks doing door-to-door. And so I got into door-to-door right in the middle of college there. By the time I graduated, I basically figured out I did not want to be in ministry at that point.
Okay.
But I graduated and I got a degree, but my degree was double major in Bible and church ministries.
Sure.
And it was unaccredited.
Yeah,
So it was more useless than a regular degree in Bible and Church Ministries because it was also unaccredited. And then the only real skill that I had was door-to-door sales. So I was just like, well, I guess I'll just keep doing that for a while. So I did that all the way up until I started getting into the online space and
Really?
podcasting and content.
So how long did you do door-to-door sales?
About 6 years. Six, 7 years, yeah.
Do you travel doing it or just all locally?
No, it was all locally.
All local.
I never did any like summer programs or anything. It was all year-round operations. So, just local.
What was the? I don't know if you sold one product or multiple products.
So started in solar.
Okay.
And then did alarms for a couple years.
Yep.
And then did water purification.
Okay.
And that's kind of where
What was your favorite one?
ended. I always tell people the best money was in water.
Okay.
Just fat margins and not as much of a sales cycle. So solar was pretty good commissions, and I know a lot of people are doing that now. But you got to wait a really long time to get paid for the install times and stuff. And I was like, if I'm going to wait that long, I may as well just get into real estate or mortgages or something like that. But with water, I could get fat margins. But what I always tell people is I think I cut my teeth selling alarms because it was just so cold, so cold. There was no appointment setting. There was no set an appointment, come back later. It was like, I'm here to sell you now.
Right now.
And then in an hour, I'm going to high five with the installer as I walk out, and it's going to be in before your head hits the pillow.
Wow.
So like that was a huge learning experience, and we just had a blast. It was a good company culture, and we just had a lot of fun.
Do you think that there's a direct correlation between entrepreneurs and sales?
100%, man.
Yeah.
100%. I don't think you can beat around the bush. I think the direct correlation is more about how to handle rejection.
Okay.
And so I think sales, handling rejection is a byproduct of being in sales.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know Guy Raz, How I Built This, one of the largest podcasts out there. He was recently doing a tour because his book, How I Built This, came out. And a lot of people ask him, hey, what's the common denominator? You interview the world's top entrepreneurs, right? What's one of the common denominators? And one of the things he always says, I listened to him on several different shows. One of the things he always says is entrepreneurs' ability to handle rejection is unprecedented.
Okay.
And so I think people that are in sales just have that kind of savage push through rejection mentality that entrepreneurs desperately need.
I've always felt like entrepreneurs have a direct correlation between sales because entrepreneurs have the ability to jump into waters, and at the beginning of it, you have to wear all the hats.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you can be an entrepreneur and suck at like bookkeeping or accounting. You may suck at even marketing to a certain degree. But if you're going to start a business, you've got to be good at sales because you're going to be the person generating the income,
right?
At least until you get it off the ground.
The oxygen.
Yeah, until someone else can get there. So it's kind of one of those things where I feel like it, unless you go raise a bunch of capital and so forth.
Right.
But even in that manner,
sales.
right? You're going to sell that concept. Right? So I think sales is always a part of true entrepreneurship through it. When you did all these door-to-door sales, what made you make the transition from, man, I'm doing these door-to-door sales for 6 years, I'm going to go start a podcast?
Yeah, good question. So I've always kind of been a person to look into the future and see where I'm headed and ask myself if that's somewhere I want to be headed, which I think is a generically good exercise that a lot of people just never do. Like surprisingly high amount of people never do that.
Right.
And then wonder why they are where they are now. It's like, well, because that's the direction that you were headed in for the last 20 years.
Right.
So when I sat down and thought about it, I was like 22 or something when I first pulled six figures doing door to door, and that was like a big goal that I'd accomplished for myself. And after I did that, it was kind of a counterintuitive effect that it took on my life, because you would think that would have been a really positive thing. It would have been like, wow, this is the vehicle for me. Like I found a vehicle that allows me to make six figures at 22 and 20 hours a week working, and like just hanging out, having fun, 4 days of like, it was not a lot of work, and it seemed to be a lot of money. Like I was making more money than most adults make, right?
Right.
And I just looked at myself at age 32 or age 42, and I just didn't like the future. And this is, by the way, not to talk trash on door-to-door sales industry at all. It's just that I didn't like the version that I saw in the future. And so I was just like, well, I can either keep heading down this direction and wake up in 10 years and be in the same spot, maybe a little bit better, right? Maybe I'm making more money, maybe things are a little bit different, but ultimately they're kind of the same. Or I can make a pivot again right now and accept humility heading into this new path, starting over at the bottom, and just learn as much as I can. And that's kind of what took me down the podcasting route, because I basically at the time, I didn't know that it was going to be podcasting. I just knew it wasn't going to be door to door. And I knew I couldn't fall back on my degree, because again, it was not it wasn't helpful.
Right.
So I, for the first time in my life ever, dove into like personal development type things and started, reading some books for the first time and listening to some audio. And that's when I came across podcasts and started listening to a few podcasts and things. And after listening to a few podcasts, it was kind of like, this seems like a really interesting way to generate income, but also grow my network, because I didn't have any network. Like it was non-existent at that point.
Right.
And when I say that, I very much mean it, because growing up in that bubble, when I left, all the people from my entire childhood, from 0 to age 21, 22, were basically like, okay, good luck, but you're not doing what we're for anymore, so, that's it.
Yeah.
So when I left that, it was like, okay, I don't have anybody else. And then when I left the company I was working for, the mentor that I had at that company literally ignored me because I wasn't making any money for him anymore.
Sure.
So I was pretty much starting over from scratch in terms of a network, and I figured this podcasting thing, it seems like these people get to have conversations with people that are awesome, that are killing it in this game, and I guess if I want to do pretty well, I should probably go hang out with people that are doing pretty well for themselves. And so podcasting kind of just started moving its way into it. It checked all my boxes. I had a lifestyle choice. It had time freedom, location freedom, financial freedom, and had all the things that I was kind of looking for. So I was just like, all right, let's go for it. Let's do it.
So when you started your podcast, I'm assuming at the beginning you kept your job for a little bit, the door-to-door sales, wise, you kind of launched out into this podcast world. When you started the podcast, what were you, take me back to when you started, what were you kind of thinking there? What were you looking for? Just this new path to see if it would take you down some road? Did you know how to monetize it yet? Did you understand, or just said, I'm going to go create the podcast and see what happens?
Yeah, definitely. It was the latter rather than the former. Yeah, I didn't have any like real plan about it. I just kind of knew that, it kind of goes back to that. I forget who is attributed with this quote, but you don't have to be great to get started, but you got to get started to be great. And I kind of just knew that intuitively, like that just makes sense. Like you just got to kind of go for it and hope things turn out okay. I did take it more of a strategic standpoint in the terms of like I hired a podcast coach. I attended a podcast mastermind. I tried to just get into that space and start filling my circle with a bunch of people who were doing that and doing it extremely well and at a high level, so that I could get some more of that strategy. My whole thing was like, how can I cut the timeline down?
Gotcha.
Right? Like if it takes 10 years to build a successful show, how can I do it in 2?
Right.
And to me, it just made sense to go straight to the source, the people who had been doing it for 10 years, and say, hey, what things should I be doing? What things should I not be doing? How do you launch a show successfully? How do you grow a show? How do you monetize a show? So I went that direction, hired a couple people, spent a little bit of money, and to your point, I was still doing door-to-door, which allowed me the freedom to be able to like go have a killer month and then spend some money on some mentorship and coaching and things like that. So
just ballpark, how much would you say you spent when you launched your podcast with your coaching mentor mastermind? Just ballpark, how much you think you invested in that education?
$30,000.
30 G's?
Something like that.
Yeah,
if you include a couple masterminds and some coaching. So I'll tell you this, I had I pulled a 0% interest credit card when I started my podcast. And it had a $42,000 limit on it, and I filled that up in the first 8-9 months of my show with just podcast-related expenses, like traveling to events, hotels, flights, event tickets, masterminds, coaching, as much education and learning as I could fill it on.
Just out of curiosity, I know you were married at the time.
Yeah.
What did that do to the marriage relationship? Anything?
Yeah, luckily my wife trusts my judgment on financial things for sure, and we have a good relationship in that sense in a lot of ways, but her family did not have financial stability growing up. My family did have financial stability growing up, so I think that she just kind of trusted my judgment on those things. It made her nervous, 100%. You know what I mean? Like when the first mastermind I ever joined, it was $6,500 and it was for a weekend. I remember talking to her about it, and I could sense the nervousness in her voice. God bless her. But I sensed the nervousness there. But at the end of the day, she was just like, I know that if you spend this, you're going to go make it work.
Right.
Know? So yeah, there was some nervousness for sure. But
when you started the podcast and you launch it, what do you call your first podcast?
Build Your Network.
So you started at Build and you left it, still the same name now, right?
That's the name of the show, yep. So the idea was, I didn't know a ton about online business, didn't know a ton about podcasting, but I knew that I needed to find some sort of a niche, something that that people weren't talking about, because to come into a saturated space, you got to be able to like shoot to the top of that space pretty quickly, or be drowned out by all the other noise. And I knew that I wasn't in a position to shoot to the top of a space that was highly competitive, so I just kind of created my own, which was networking at the time. I was going to do sales, but I searched sales, and there's a billion podcasts out there that are about sales. So I was like, well, that's not going to be my blue ocean.
Right.
So let's go find a different blue ocean.
By the way.
Yes, it is.
Blue
it
ocean.
is. So I went and found a different blue ocean, which happened to be networking. I thought there was going to be the same thing. I was like, networking is so important. There's got to be a billion podcasts on that too, but there just wasn't. So.
In your Build Your Network, do you actually discuss that topic, like a strategic way of how to network?
Yeah, so most of our content is interviews.
Right.
In the recent months, though, we've been trying to get a little bit more into providing some like real strategic, tactical type of networking-based content, because that's something I just view it as being so needed. Like everything that I have in my life now is 100% directly correlated to the people that I know, that I've been able to have relationships with now. So we've been, kind of just pulling back the curtain on like, okay, let's reverse engineer how we got to this point, basically.
What if you take me back when you started? What was the first interview or interviewee that you interviewed?
First person I ever.
You remember who episode 1 is?
Episode 1 was a guy. I think it was a guy named John Corcoran. Who is like it was a good relationship because he was really well known as a networker. He was always a guy that's like setting up these dinners at different events and stuff like that. He was worked in the White House and different things like that. So he was the first guy I ever had on my show. The first like really well known guy was John Lee Dumas, who has Entrepreneurs on Fire, and he was the guy who ran that mastermind that I went to I went to his house in Puerto Rico and spent some time with him for the weekend. And then that's what kind of like started that idea of like, this seemed to pique more people's interest because they knew who he was, so I should probably keep trying to get people like that.
Now you said you have 500 episodes in like 3 years. How often are you doing them?
3 a week, and we just bumped it up to 4 a week, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
What's the strategy of doing 3 a week podcasts?
Yeah, at first,
there's all different strategies, right? 1 a week, 5 a week, whatever it is.
Sure. So I'll tell you the honest answer. The honest answer at first is that John Lee Dumas, who I was learning from, he was famous for his show Entrepreneur on Fire, which gets millions and millions of downloads, but he was doing 7 days a week interviews.
Wow.
And so I looked at it and I was like, oh, okay, 7 a week. I don't want to do that many, but let's do 5. So I told my coach I was going to do 5 a week, and he was like, oh, maybe you should start at 3.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that I listened to him because 3 is a buttload of interviews.
It's a beast, man.
Yeah. So that's how I kind of accidentally ended up at 3.
Yeah.
But I think that it did some amazing things for me. And when I now coach and consult on podcasting and helping people start and grow podcasts and things, and most people are just like, well, we'll do 1 a week. And I always try to encourage people to do more than that, for the reasons that I learned were beneficial, that I did not do strategically at all at the beginning. But the first thing is epic amount of learning. Like when you're literally doing 3 times the amount of learning if you're doing 3 a week.
Sure.
It's simple arithmetic, right? It's just like instead of doing 1 interview a week, like interviewing, as you know, is a real skill set that you have to develop. Like when I first started, I did not expect that in the least. I thought it was just like, oh yeah, you get on a call and you ask some questions. And I started doing it, and it would just be awkward silences and me trying to formulate a transitional statement and like trying to follow a story. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is a real skill.
Yeah. So
the fact that I was doing 3 a week allowed me to dramatically improve my interviewing ability because it's condensed. You know what I mean? Like I think that it's more than just 3 times the amount of learning. Honestly, I don't have anything to quantify that. I just think that because it was so condensed, where I was doing, I would do 2 or 3 days a week or so I'd be doing interviews. So I would, knock out 4, 5, 6 interviews in 3 days. Whereas if I was only doing 1, I would only have to do 4 interviews a month to keep up with that release schedule.
Right.
So just that when you space out interviews that much, you kind of forget some of the lessons that you learned from the last one because you did it 5 weeks ago. Whereas I had to do them every single week to keep up with the workflow.
Yeah.
And then my network absolutely exploded because everybody that I brought on, I kept asking them for other intros to other interesting people and started getting to know people on a much, much faster basis. It helped my ranking in iTunes, it helped my download numbers, it helped all of those different types of things. So I tell people all the time starting up a show, do more than you want, do more than you think that you can do, but don't do too much to where you're gonna not be consistent.
Yeah.
You know, you can't say I'm gonna do 5 a week and then 3 weeks in you're like, okay, I'm gonna do 2. You know, and then next week I'll do 5 again, and then this week I'll do 3. Like, you gotta
What day do you post on certain days?
Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Oh, now Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. You post on. Is your show when you started it? Have you always kind of kept the same theme of the show? Is it always like strictly about how to network and who you're networking with, and then interviewing people to build your network?
So when I got better at interviewing, my interview style switched from just like a set amount of questions regarding networking to more like kind of what you and I are doing right now. Like, let's talk about your story, talk about your background. I think those things are paramount to having good content. I think a lot of people do their audience a disservice by only going tactical. I think that the story matters. If you don't have the story, then you don't have the motivation to take advantage of the tactics.
Gotcha.
And so we started kind of shifting more to pulling out a story, and then as the story progresses, I see clear things about networking, connecting, relationships. You know, they'll just mention, well, I had this mentor, or, you know, I got this job and it set me up with this guy. Like, there's always something there that I can pull out towards the end of the conversation, and make sure that we kind of gear the conversation more about networking relationships.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you learn, because I was a public speaker for years and years and years. And when I switched over to doing interviews, I thought, well, dude, this is gonna be easy, because I don't have to create any of the content. I'm just gonna sit here and interview and talk to somebody. And it was way harder than what I thought, like way harder. And I started in the podcast interview world, and I went really, really big off the bat. That was kind of my strategy and approach to it. And I went massive off the bat with these huge interviews. And now I even hate like playing them. Yeah. Cause I'm like, God, that sucks so bad, dude.
Yeah, this one I'll tell you about really quick. I don't know if you know Patrick Bet-David.
Yeah.
So Valuetainment, he's a big name when I got him. He wasn't as big now. Like, his YouTube channel has like tripled since I interviewed him the first time. I went back and interviewed him again to make up for the disaster of the first interview. But I kind of, what I would tell people now is like, maybe wait till you have a few reps under your belt and then go for the big names, because I was just eager and ambitious and like trying to.
Sure.
So I got Patrick on my show. It was one of my first, 20 interviews or something. And I lived on the outskirts of town where I grew up, and so we didn't have like a hardwired connection to the internet. We had satellite internet, which is just not good. So most of my interviews, I was doing on audio only instead of any video.
All right.
Because I didn't want to mess up the bandwidth, and I wanted the audio quality to be good, because obviously it's a podcast. And I failed to explain that to him when he jumped on the call.
Okay.
And he just assumed that it was a video interview. And I was not a strong enough interviewer to assert control of my interview, which I didn't realize at the time that was allowed, right? Like, if it was somebody bigger than me, I was just like, defer to them, but as I got to understand, like, oh, actually this is my show. I have to be the host and assert like what I need from the guest, you know? And so I just kind of let it go. We started in the interview. There's latency started happening in my headphones, where I would hear myself talk like a second after I actually spoke a word. So we were already in the interview, and so I couldn't do anything about it. But it messed me up the whole time. I had to pull like an earphone off of my ear so I could hear myself say it loud. But in my other, I couldn't unplug it because I had to hear his response. And if you unplug it, you get all this monitor feedback that like messes everything up. So I had to keep my headphones plugged in, and then I'm listening to him and then trying to respond. It was just a disaster. I even apologized right after the interview, because I felt so bad. It taught me a big lesson of like, I had not earned the right to have big names on my show yet. I wasn't good enough. I had not put in the work. I had not put in the reps to be able to earn the ability to like bring on that level of guest. And it was a really big lesson for me. Like I said before, luckily he gave me another chance. Like a year and a half later, I flew out to his studio in Dallas, and we knocked it out then, and a much better experience.
Much cleaner
that time
experience
around.
for you.
Yeah, and for him, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, dude, I completely feel your pain. Like, like I said, I started big, and it's helped me expand my podcast, like who I can interview. That was the big play. That's kind of why I was doing it. But on the same hand, I look back, and like I said, I didn't want to show those videos. Like, I'm so like, my editors had to like chop it up 200 different ways just to make it seem like it was a halfway decent interview or whatever. When you, I want to talk about how you book a lot of your guests, because this leads into your new company or additional company to your podcast, and say your new company name, Guestio.
Guestio. Yep.
Guestio.
Yep.
Guestio.com. So let's back up before you launched that. Go back to how you used to be booking all your, let's do it two different ways. I want to talk about how you book your big name guests,
okay,
but also just your average, or business owner or whatever it was down the road. How did you do it?
Yeah, so oddly enough, it's the same way.
Okay.
It's just the bigger names would take sometimes months or years to be able to get them to say yes, whereas a smaller name would be like, sure, next week.
Yeah.
So kind of the same way. I always start off being very purposeful.
Okay.
And so I created a list, like a master list of all the people that I wanted to interview.
Okay.
And then I started reaching out, and with, like I said, with the easier names, it was really easy to start crossing off some of those people. And then I started noticing that if I could stick in one industry, that it was easier to get more people in that industry because they all kind of knew each other, and so we could kind of like be interconnected. And even if they wouldn't make an intro, I could still leverage the names of the other people that I had on to grab attention if I'm doing a cold reach out.
Sure.
So the majority of it was build a list, cold reach out to that list via multiple channels, whichever one I thought would give me the highest chance of success. I saw a lot of success early on, and really still with Instagram DMs. Okay. I would just pull up my camera, do a quick video, send it over to them, make sure they knew that, like, I call them by name. I'd say, hey, Andrew, just, I'd say something, kind of respectful about what they're doing. Seen pictures of your studio. I love your studio setup. It looks amazing. And then I'd say, I have a show, and I'm gonna drop some info below. And then I'd put a bunch of info below on the show, and I started booking people in that way. And then when I started trying to get bigger names, I realized that if I already had bigger names that I mentioned and used the credibility from those people that they already knew, liked, and trusted, they didn't know who Travis Chappell was,
right?
But they knew who John Lee Dumas was, or they knew who Patrick David was, or they knew who Ed Milet was, or like some of these other people. So they would, the odds of me booking them would significantly increase. And I noticed that people stopped worrying about my download numbers. Like before, it was like, I reach out to like someone like Kevin Harrington, and they were like, well, what are your download numbers? And I'd tell them, and they were like, yeah, no, right. Which rightfully so, right? But then the next time I reached out to Kevin Harrington, it was through a direct connection that I knew that he had, that I also had, and it was an immediate yes without even worrying about what my download numbers were. I started figuring out that like the metrics that I thought were important to people were not as important as I thought they were at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I just doubled down on that strategy.
Yeah.
So then I started just, I would go to Instagram, and I would go look at the list of people that they follow, and pull out all of the names on that list that I had interviewed. And at the beginning, that list was pretty small.
Sure.
But then, when it started growing, it was like, man, I would go to somebody's, list of following people that they're following, and list out 17 names. And at that point, you can't say no to that. You know what I mean? Like, there's too much credibility. It's just a punch in the face of credibility, you know, and that's eventually how I got Grant. The first time I reached out was crickets. I didn't hear anything. And then the next time I reached out was like, hey, I got this person, like almost 12. I think I listed out almost a dozen names. And then the last one I did, it was Elena, and then also your wife also has already been on the show. So I just want to see when you're going to come on, basically. And I was like, I'll be in Miami next week. We'll, set it up in your studio, make it happen real quick. And then he was like, sure, just email my assistant. So I started realizing that the numbers didn't matter as much as having the credibility and recognition, that they knew that they weren't going to be wasting their time with me. That's the big thing, is that people who are busy, as you know, don't like to waste their time. So if they have no point of reference for who you are or the value that you bring to the world, and you're just cold pitching them, you're just giving them a task to do. They now have homework. They have to go see if it's worth their time to say yes, which already is a waste of their time. So a lot of them don't do it. They'll just no response, right? So I started making it easier for them to say yes by getting all these people that existed in the same circles. And then eventually I would branch off to a new circle. It's always more difficult to get the first person in the circle to say yes. You gotta, maybe reach out to a higher number of people as a percentage. But as soon as you get that person to say yes, now you can start nailing down other people in this circle. And the coolest thing to me was always making connection points and adding value to the connections that I had built in multiple circles, because I started realizing that if you're over here in this circle, like if you're in the podcasting, like influencer circle, like the John Lee Dumases and Pat Flynn and Amy Porterfield and that kind of world, a lot of them didn't know all the people over in this circle that would be more like, the Grant Cardone, Ed Milet, Evan Carmichael type world.
Yeah.
So I figured out, like, if I could be the connection piece, like the bridge between these two worlds that are all extremely high level people performing at high levels, and like kind of connect those people together, then that could be a huge value piece for me, which also loops me into continuous conversations and allows me to start building better relationships with people as a person of value and not just as a person of receiving value and taking value. So that was kind of the strategy from the beginning. And as I started doing that and started knocking out big names on my list, people that had been in the game a lot longer than I had, who had been trying to book some of these people, were just like, man, how did you get that person? How'd you get this person? And so I broke down a strategy and I created this like course. I wrote even like a small book about it called Meet Your Hero. And I was telling people like, reach out your list, do this, do that. And some people would follow it and get some results. But at the end of the day, it's just hard work.
Yeah.
Like when I got Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul author, it took me almost a full year to book him on the show. I would reach out once a month after the initial first couple reach outs, and he did not respond.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know if he was getting my email,
Yeah.
but I kept reaching out like once a month. And then one time, like 6 months into it, he responded and was like, okay, let's set it up. And then we finally, like 2 or 3 months after he responded, got a spot, went out to his place in Santa Barbara and set it up.
Yeah.
So it was like people just weren't willing to, I started noticing that it was just like, not even just people weren't willing to do the work, but they just had other things to do. Because I had the luxury of when I started my show that it was my side hustle, it was my main focus. I was doing door to door on the side to pay the bills,
Right.
but like the time that I was dedicating to this was spent connecting, networking, building relationships, doing email reach out, like doing Instagram reach out. That's where a lot of my time went. So if you're running a business or multiple businesses, you just don't have time to do all the things that I was doing to book these huge name guests,
Right.
which led me to Guestio. And essentially I had the idea for a little while, but I was just kind of sitting on it because I was so busy. But when COVID hit, all of the travel that I had planned for doing interviews, for events, just got taken off my calendar in a matter of a week. So we went to work on building the software, and so now it's October. We just are put out a beta this past week, and are getting some really good feedback on it. So essentially, it's like a guest creator marketplace,
Right.
Where if you're a blogger, podcaster, YouTuber, summit host, whatever, and you need expert guests for your content, then you can go to Guestio and book those expert guests. The big difference is that every guest sets their own price point. So it takes remember I was talking about the problem before is that they want to know that it's worth their time.
Right.
So the way that it's worth their time through Guestio is you're paying them for their time. So yes, you pay them to be on your show, but you also don't have to wait a year and a half and go through layers of gatekeepers and be told no 25 times to get them on your show. You book
Right.
them now, you just pay them for their time to make sure, and then for them at that point, they don't have any reason to tell you no, because you're paying the
Right.
exact price that they said their time was worth.
Yeah.
So it connects creators and guests together, and then it gives you all the tools to be able to do it effectively. So you can find guests, discover guests, book them, schedule them, message them, download their media kits and press kits. If you're a content creator, you know how difficult it is to try to get somebody's media bio sent over and their headshots and their media, their features and links and
Right.
all social media, all the kind of stuff that you have to like go to Google and search for, or be in a 17 long email chain with their assistant to try to figure it out. And then you go to prepare for the interview, and it's like, oh man, were we talking on Facebook Messenger? Were we talking on the email? Like I got to go search 12 things to find the thing that they sent over to me. So, downloadable press kits, everything's built inside of Guestio so that it makes the interview process really clean and simple for folks.
When you built Guestio, I mean, obviously me being on the show makes complete sense to have a freaking a platform like that, right? If I want to go grab people,
Yep.
It's especially when we were first starting off, man, it was like you said, it was a grind, dude. I had a full-time person that was just dialing people up, basically, right? But so Guestio makes complete logical sense to me. Do you have it broken down into like categories? Like say mine's money is show. Do you have it broken down into like a financial segment that I could go pull from?
Yeah, so you can basically select a bunch of different tags. Right now we're calling them tags instead of categories because we're just trying, we want to see what users are calling themselves before we create the categories. So in the next 2-3 months after we collect a ton of data from people creating accounts, we'll kind of create more solid, more static categories. Right now you can tag whatever you want to tag. So you can tag business, entrepreneurship, networking, money, finance. You can tag whatever you want to tag in those categories, and people can find you on those categories themselves.
Weird question. I know you have it set up where it's like you could join it and you could put, my fees, just whatever the number, someone puts whatever the fee is, $100, whatever it is, if you want to book me. Have you ever did it the other way around?
Yes.
Where you said, hey, I have a podcast and I'm willing to pay people. I want to be on podcasts.
Yes.
And I'll pay you to be on your podcast.
So it's a dual user marketplace. You can search guests or you can search platforms.
Okay.
So if you're doing a book launch and you want to hit the New York Times bestseller list or some other bestseller list, or even just Amazon bestseller, then you would be able to go on there and find platforms and book them by paying their guest fees.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So you can book directly.
Both set up into it.
Yep.
Yeah, because I think there's also a lot of people that want to get on podcasts.
Correct.
They may not even have a podcast, but they use podcasts as a way to market and advertise. So you
it's a
actually
lead
put that
gen
in as well.
Yep.
That's awesome, man. When you built out this platform, I know you got Manny Pacquiao right now. Is probably one of your biggest names.
Headliner for sure.
Headliner for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just, if you can, just kind of back that up and tell us, how you as a company are getting these people to sign up, and then what is your kind of strategy moving forward to get these big names to sign up?
Sure. Right now, this is why I think I always talk about how important networking is. Mm-hmm. Because if I tried to build this 3 years ago, it would have 0 legs to stand on.
Okay.
But because I took the last 3 years just building a network of people and trying to add value where I could, now I have a place to start off with. So all of the top level names that are on the show right now is direct reach out from me saying like, hey, I built this cool thing. Would you mind giving it a shot or testing it out or giving me some feedback or whatever? Mm-hmm. So all the top people, the Jordan Harbingers who gets 6 million downloads a month on his show, like they came directly just because I've built relationships with them over the last few years. Going forward, the strategy will be much more on purpose.
Okay.
But I can't go into that as much until we have some different things set up legally on the back end.
So you guys are going to go after and
the
try
A-listers.
to recruit. Yeah, you can
Yes.
probably that's a good word for A-listers.
Yep.
You guys are going to try to recruit those people to come over, because the thought would be if you have those A-listers there, whoever that may be for different people. The thought would be it'd have to be drawing in these podcasters who have these podcasts.
Correct.
To be willing to pay them, right?
Correct.
To
Yep.
get on them. Because when I went and paid them, dude, it was you had to go, like you said, you had to go through a bunch of hoops.
Yep.
Just to get to them to go pay to them.
Yep, and the cool thing too is we'll be building in some features to protect against podcasters or content creators who have giant channels with huge audiences that shouldn't be paying for people to be on their show, right? Like if you are someone like Jordan, you get 6 million downloads a month. You shouldn't have to pay for a guest. They should be happy to be on your show to promote their thing, right? Yeah, exactly. So we'll have a feature built in where basically it allows you to also tell the guests like, hey, we're a verified account. This is verified through third-party, sources at Guestio that we reach X amount of people a month. We'd love to have you on the show, but we can't pay the $5,000 to get you on.
Right.
If you want to come on, we'd love to have you though. You know what I mean? So it becomes like a much more holistic connection piece to bring people on each other's, platforms for mutually beneficial purposes.
Yeah. If you can back up for a second, for someone that's out there listening right now or watching you talk about podcast, what would you tell that person if they should or should not? What would be the kind of determining factor? They're in business, they're an entrepreneur now. If they should or should not start a podcast?
You should.
You should?
Yeah.
The audience says just do it?
I mean, a lot of people say like, not everybody should have podcasts. I'm totally on the opposite end of that argument because the audience is not all that matters.
Okay.
The audience to me is the cherry on top. If you happen to build an audience, great. That's even better. And it'll be the best decision you've ever made.
Okay.
Because if you have an audience, you can do whatever. I mean, just because we're talking about him already, someone like Grant is a perfect example.
Right.
He built his audience into a, $2 billion real estate holdings empire now. Like that doesn't happen without the audience.
Right.
Like he's a smart real estate investor, but he's not Blackstone. He's not some of these other syndicators that are out there. The reason he built what he was able to build is because of the audience. Like the audience, having an audience of super fans enables you to be able to do whatever you want and see a certain level of success. It might not always be successful because, sometimes the market doesn't want what you have to offer. But you will have some level of success because you have a bunch of people who are just going to buy your product or service just because they like you, just because you've added a ton of value to them over the years. So that's the cherry on top is my point. The other things that come from, I was just listening to Jocko Willink on James Altucher's show when I was at the gym this morning, and Jocko was talking about, like, I would do my podcast for free. He's like, if nobody listened to my podcast, I would still do it, because the people that I can talk to, that I have on, and because of how much I learn from them, I learn more than anybody else, and I love doing it for those reasons. And when I was listening, I was going to send it to my producer to say, hey, let's cut this sound clip and use that in some of our promotional stuff, because it's so true. It's so true. Any of the good things that have happened for me have been direct correlation to my podcast. The network that I've built, the information that I've gotten, like the fact that I even started a software company came directly from the podcast, because I got to interview hundreds of people from dozens of different industries, perspectives. I got to see their markets, got to see what their financials looked like. I got to see so many different things that I decided, like, the software space was the most interesting to me, and thought that it would complement the things that I was doing. And so I was constantly kind of looking for, like, what would be a good software for me to do.
Right.
I thought about a couple different things. Guestio just seemed to be the one that was most congruent with what I had, and the best idea that I thought had real legs to be able to be successful. So I started that company. But that knowledge, that information, that learning would not have been possible without first starting the podcast. So the knowledge that you gain, the network that you build is absolutely invaluable. And then if you just happen to also build an audience, great. You know what I mean? Like, now you can do whatever you want to do at that point, as long as it brings value and serves that audience.
If someone's listening now and saying, but man, if I go and spend this, whatever, X amount of dollars doing it, time doing it, setting it up, creating a little studio at the house or whatever, I go put all this time, effort, energy into it. Is there any way for me to truly monetize that podcast?
100%. 100%. Just depends on how you build the show, which is a whole different show. Like, we have a whole academy just for creating, growing, launching, monetizing podcasts, because there's so many nuances and different things to learn about it. But yeah, you can definitely set it up to monetize. My challenge would be to somebody that's thinking those things is to not think about the first 3 years, but to think about it in 10 years. Think about the compound effects that your network will have and that your knowledge and learning will have if you create a show consistently for a decade. Just that. Again, no listeners ever come to it. You don't ever make a dime on it. Think about the 10-year effect that it's going to have on you, and just kind of delay the gratification just a little bit, and think about where you would be in 10 years from now. And by the way, if you create consistent quality content over a decade, there's no way you won't have an audience at the end of it, especially if you're going to spend money on it. Which brings me to my second point, which is you don't have to spend a ton of, like, when I started my show, I spent a ton of money on coaching and masterminds and stuff like that, but you could just go buy a course like mine or any of the other ones that are out there. There's a bunch of them. And then the microphone, like my entire studio setup for the first 300 episodes of my show was a $60 USB mic that I plugged into my laptop. That was my whole studio setup. And people get too lost in, like, why they shouldn't start a show and don't think about why they should start a show. Like, if you got $100, you can start a podcast tomorrow and get it out there. Like, it's $20 a month for a media host to, like, host the content, and then you can distribute it to every podcasting platform. And then I had a $60 USB mic that I plugged directly into my computer and did all of my interviews on Zoom, and that's it, man. Like, it's not, you don't have to go make it a whole production if you don't want to. You can, test the waters and build relationships and learn things for less than $100.
What about the video side of it? Should they, if doable, should they start also with the video side of it, or?
Yeah, if doable, yes.
Right.
Yes, I think that it's always good to have the video just for promotional purposes, because every other platform is visual.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, podcasting is unique in the fact that it's an audio platform. No other platform's that way. Every other platform, visual perspective is much needed, especially if you're going to promote it on, YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or any of those types of things, which I think is a great way to figure out what content is resonating with what audience, is to, like, take some of your clips from your podcast, throw it onto Facebook, and put, boost the post. You don't have to even look into your ad account and do it that way. Just boost the post for 10, 20, $30. And do that with 5 different bits of content that are that have different messages attached to them, and see which one performs best. And then create more content around that thing, and then do that again. You know what I mean?
When you talk about creating content, we were talking about this earlier, but when you talk about creating content, say someone's starting a podcast right now, that they're not going the interview route, they're going to go, they're an ABC company, whatever they do. Do they have to have their podcast built around what they maybe currently do in their business, or can they just go freaking create it on whatever they want to?
Totally. It depends on the goal. What do you want from your podcast? If you're wanting it to be a revenue driver in your business, then obviously it has to be about your business.
Right.
But that's the cool thing about podcasting is It could just be like a side hustle thing.
Mm-hmm.
It could just be, like you have a business or you work a 9 to 5, but you love the, Los Angeles Lakers,
Mm-hmm.
or you love, MMA.
Right.
And it's like, okay, great. So on the weekends, talk about MMA on your podcast and put it out there.
Yeah.
Like if you do that consistently, again, 4, 5, 6 years, then you'll be surprised at the opportunities that come your way because you're putting yourself in a position to be open to them.
Mm-hmm.
I literally just had this conversation with a guy yesterday. His name is Chris. Shout out to Chris. He is in the manufacturing industry. He was just an employee at somebody's plant or something. I'm not even 100% sure the nuances of it, but he had a podcast for, since before I started mine, 5, 6 years maybe, and talked about the manufacturing space. And he was just like working at his company as an employee. Last week, he went full time with the podcast, set up this sponsorship deal with one of their like suppliers or something, and now he gets to like talk manufacturing. It's like he like talks manufacturing over a beer, like that's his thing. So like now he gets to do that full time. Like that's awesome. He's not making millions of dollars, but like that's an amazing lifestyle that he just created for himself because he decided to pop up a microphone on the weekends and do it consistently for a few years, even when nobody was listening. You know what I mean? So that's why I think that it's so crucial. And to answer your question before, though, it really just it depends on the goal. Like, what's the goal? Like, when I was starting my show, I didn't do sales because it was not niche enough. So my second thought was I'll do door-to-door sales. But I didn't want to do door-to-door sales because I was trying to get out of that.
Right.
I didn't want to be known for door-to-door sales. So that's why I ended up going the networking route, even though it was something I didn't really know anything about, because the door-to-door thing, I was trying to get out of that. So you also have to think about in the future, if this does take off, would I be okay with being known as like that guy or that girl? Like, am I cool with being, the door-to-door sales guy for the rest of my life? And again, no ill will toward that industry at all, but that's just not how I saw my future unraveling. So I think that that's definitely a factor to think about. Like, what do you want to be doing in that? Like, do you want to be doing some speaking on inspiration and motivation and, daily routines or personal development or whatever? Then start a personal development podcast. Even if you have a finance company that has nothing to do with personal development or teaching people about how to become a better version of themselves, you know what I mean? Like, start a personal development podcast. It'll help you become a better person anyway, just as a side effect, because you're learning and putting out content about that thing. And they say you never can really learn something fully until you teach it, right? So you're teaching content, you're going to be able to learn that and master that so much more effectively. But then also 5 years down the road, if you've built a decent audience, like this is what your book deal is going to be. This is what your speaking career is going to be. This is going to be the thing that you're known for. So that definitely plays a factor in what you should talk about.
On your Guestio, I know you're in beta right now. Do you know when you think you'll fully release it? What's your plan there? Yeah,
we're just trying to collect a bunch of user feedback and data right now. So the answer is as soon as we feel comfortable with the product that we've built. We're making like, we're at the point now we're making daily tweaks to the product.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? Like getting feedback, making a tweak, getting feedback, making a tweak. So as soon as we feel comfortable with like this is the product that people want and are asking for, we will launch it and promote it like crazy. But if I had to guess like a timeline, I would say like Q1 of 2021. I would say that we're going to be pretty much going full force at that point.
On launching it, who do you think? I don't know if you can say this or not, but if you could snag 3 A-listers to come on it and be a part of it, as far as having where you could book them. You got 3 in mind that you'd want to headline it for you, if you will?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the probably 3 most influential ones. So The Rock, Will Smith, and probably LeBron James would be 3 different
trying to get on there?
Culture worlds that they're going to bring onto the platform. Let me caveat that by saying Joe Rogan would be very much at the top of that list as well, but I know that he doesn't do a lot of that kind of stuff. So
I was trying to think through it when you mentioned Joe Rogan. I don't know the last time I've really seen him being interviewed. As much as him just freaking interviewing everybody nonstop. On that thing.
He does not do it a lot. He says no. I know I have a lot of people who've like gotten in touch with his team to get him to like speak or go to conferences or something. He says no to basically everything. And they've offered him a lot of money, like a good amount of money.
He just won't go do it.
I'm
trying to think.
Which is respect, man. Like you've built an awesome freaking life doing something that you absolutely love and spending time with the people that mean the most to you. So congrats to you.
And he went with I would think, kind of a unique format when you talk about the podcast world.
Yeah.
Because he'll do podcasts that are 3 hours long, pretty consistent too, like not randomly. Like they're all pretty much 2 to 3 hours.
Yep.
He does these.
I heard one the other day,
conversations.
5.5 hours.
5.5 hour conversation he does.
Yep.
And
About nothing.
Yeah. And,
They don't edit it. They don't take out ums and ahs. They don't take out, like literally they left this guy's bathroom break on air.
Yeah.
Like the guy was like, can I go pee? And he was like, sure. And then he left. And they
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
even cut to him coming back. They left the mics live the whole time. They don't take
Yeah.
out anything, man.
Yeah, yeah.
That's part of the appeal, man. That's why people like the independent creator space, because
Yeah.
it's less Hollywood. It's less curated. It's less like, well, you can't say that and don't say that. And well, we're not allowed to talk about that. And like, oh, don't mention that company name because we have to pay. Like, there's none of that exists in the pod. It's all independent.
Yeah.
That's why what Joe Rogan did, I think, is so monumental, because it took the power away from the powers that be. You know what I mean? It took it to where like he's got to be the largest independently owned media empire in the world at this point. He gets over 100 million downloads per month on his show.
God.
So his distribution, rivals like NBC. I don't know their numbers, to be honest, but I would assume that his independent thing that he started in his garage that has no real production value to it, like that's what's so awesome about it though, man. That's what people crave, is that authenticity, that they're listening to a real conversation. Even though he's edgy, it's still him. He's not speaking through this filter that's like, well, I want people to see this side of me, so let me pretend to be like this for a second. Right. It's none of that. It's just you get what you get, you know.
It's unique because on his podcast, like you said, he just randomly goes all over the board.
Yeah.
And it feels like he has like no, and he may, obviously he's a super intelligent guy, but it feels like he has no actual agenda on his list, if you will.
Right.
And he just kind of goes wherever it freaking goes for that 3-5 hours. He floats.
And to give him further props on that, one of the biggest things that I get, because I do a lot of podcast coaching, consulting, different things like that. So many people, man. If I had $1 for every time somebody said this, I'd be pretty rich. But they always say, so I have this idea for a show, and it's going to be like Joe Rogan. And as soon as they say that, I'm just like, no, you can't do Joe Rogan. Only he can. He was the blue ocean at the time.
Right.
There were like 500 podcasts that existed back then.
Yeah.
So there was a niche where, like, at the time, it was mostly just, newspapers that also had a podcast. So at the time, there were no just random shows with semi-famous people talking about whatever and talking about, aliens and weed and, mushrooms and comedy and politics and whatever they wanted to talk about. There was nothing like that that existed. So now that that's been done, and been done now thousands of times by other people, it's been done. If you're going to try to do that, you better come to the table with some chops, because you got to compete with Joe Rogan, who the top people can't even compete with. Like the New York Times is second to Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? Like all these other people are. So if you're going to come into that space, you better be really, really, really good or extremely famous, which has also happened. You see like Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, or you see now there's another show called Smartless with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and Sean Hayes that came together. These A-listers are starting to put up their own content creation sites and do their own podcasts, and they can talk about whatever, because again, they're famous. And they already have those existing audiences, and they can actually compete at that level.
I want to switch over to a little bit about the blogging side, which kind of, to me, was like blogging started first, and then kind of led into this podcast, which led into like video vlogging, if you will. Do you do the blogging now?
Yeah, so we started blogging probably like 3-4 months ago.
Okay.
And we're just trying to learn as much as we can about it right now. Our thing's been podcasting for so long, but we're just like, man, we have so much content. I mean, 500 almost episodes of the show is a lot of content. Yeah. And so now we're just kind of going through and trying to find relevant topics and make sure that we're putting out things that people are searching for, and then sending traffic to the correct places and things like that. So. Yeah.
Will that help with like are you using it, or will it help with the SEO side of it? Will people searching you?
Yeah, 100%.
Are you trying to tie that into it for finding you?
Yes. Yep. That's really the main strategic reason behind it. Is podcasts are great for a lot of things, but the one thing that they're not great at all is discoverability. Okay. It's really difficult to have people just discover your show on a podcasting platform. Right. They got to be directed there through some sort of other channel. The number one way would be through other people's podcasts, right? Because that's the only way that you know that you're reaching a podcast listener is if they listened to you on somebody else's podcast.
So like you mean like a podcaster being interviewed by another podcaster that mentions his podcast?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct. Yeah, that's been my number one way for sure, because like I said, any other form of advertising, you're not 100% sure if the person that you're advertising to even listens to podcasts to begin with.
Right.
Which makes your job of getting them to listen to your podcast extremely difficult, because you have to convince them to consume a whole new type of media.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then you have to convince them to listen to your podcast as a choice on that new medium. So that's the best way, is if you already know their podcast listener because you reached them while they were listening to a podcast. The other ways would be through that, like trying to get people in early on in their searching capabilities, right, to find you and then send some of the content through. So that's what we do with some of our blog posts. Is a lot of it's just kind of repurposed podcasting content, and then it links to the podcast episode.
I noticed earlier you talked about that you would travel to go interview someone, Jack Canfield, Grant Cardone, etc. What's the reason of traveling to them versus Zooming it?
Yeah, networking.
Okay.
It's a much, much better connection. You know, you and I could have done this on a Zoom today, but I would not have been able to see a tour of your awesome office and studio. I would not be able to have this conversation with you in person. We're going to have some dinner after this. The connection that you can cultivate with the person that you're interviewing is significantly better if you can make that happen in person.
Yeah.
So we had a bunch of stuff on the schedule, and COVID happened. We had to shut it all down.
Let's say prior to COVID, how many times are you headed out? What makes you say, okay, I'm going to go interview this person in person or via Zoom?
Yeah, really just the relationship that I want to build. Like,
Gotcha.
is this somebody who, like, not even about like their reach or how famous they are or whatever. It's more just about, are they somebody that's interesting to me to have like a real relationship with? That's really what guides that for me. So a lot of times it's based on like the things that I'm trying to learn at the time, or the people that I already know.
Yeah.
Just different things like that. Yeah. So it's kind of more intangible rather than like a real set metric that we look at.
How far ahead do you stay in your episodes?
Well, it is October right now, and we are scheduled out until February currently.
Scheduled as far as they're already done in the can?
They are done and interviewed and scheduled, ready to go.
Gotcha.
Till February.
So, and then what about booked out?
Yeah, booked out, we are scheduling interviews now. Like, I only interview one day a month now.
Okay.
So the first Wednesday every month, that's the only day I interview. It just got too much. So now I do like 8 interviews on the first Wednesday of every month, and then that's it. So we are, like, my Wednesdays are booked until February as well. First week of February is where people are booking interviews now.
How long do you do a podcast for?
Now it's about 35 minutes or so.
Okay.
Before, I had a different style before where I was doing one interview a week, and we would do more like an hour. But now that we're doing 2 interviews a week and then a solo show and then we call it a mashup episode, the midweek mashup, where we basically take like 3 different guests but one topic. So it'll be like, real estate investing, and we'll pull clips from Grant Cardone and from Dean Graziosi and from Brandon Turner from Bigger Pockets, and we throw them all into one episode and put it out on Wednesdays. So we release that. We release a solo show on Friday, and then we do 2 interviews a week now. So they're 35 minute interviews or so now.
Any big episodes you got coming up that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I'm actually headed out to St. Louis to interview Andy Frisella finally. So that one we just hadn't made it happen yet. So we finally
connected the dots and I got him on the show.
Right.
So you fly out there. Will you normally shoot in their studio?
Yeah, if they have one, we'll shoot in their studio. Yeah, if not, then I'll bring my producer with me and we'll set up shop wherever we can.
A camera and all the other stuff like that.
Yep.
That's sick, dude. Anything, like I'm sitting here asking, I got about 1,000 more questions for you about podcasts. Anything else that makes sure that you want to get out concerning Guestio right now?
Yeah, first off on the podcasting thing, I would say one more thing on that. The reason I recommend podcasting over any of the other platforms is simply the amount of time that people are willing to spend on podcasts is significantly higher than any other platform. YouTube's probably second, because Instagram, you got 3 seconds to capture attention, that's it. YouTube is about 3.5 minute average watch time. Podcasters, 80% of podcast listeners, 80% say that they listen to all or most of an episode after they hit play. So if you're putting out an hour-long episode, a 45-minute-long episode, then you just got 10 YouTube videos worth of time spent with you, which only significantly increases trust, credibility, authority with the audience that you have. So I think podcasting I just personally believe it's the best medium out there.
You think that's because I know a lot of people listen to it at the gym.
Yep.
A lot of people
Cars.
listen to it when they drive. Driving to work, they're on podcasts. The kind of radio they stop. and travelers.
Yeah.
On the airplanes and trains and so forth, they listen to podcasts a lot.
It's because you don't have to focus on it.
Right. You have it kind of in the
You could
background.
be cleaning the house, doing the dishes,
Yeah.
have an earbud in and listening to a podcast.
Right.
Every other form of content, demands your full undivided attention.
Right.
So it just made sense to me because I've never been like a big YouTube watcher.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't watch it that often. So podcasting made so much more sense to me because I found myself doing that. It'd be like, oh, well, I'm going and doing this thing. It may as well be listening to a podcast while I'm doing it. Why not? You know what I mean? So that's really where I started realizing that in myself. And then when I read the statistic finally, I was like, oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then it's because it's away from you. Like you press play, you put your phone back in your pocket. Or if you're on a commute, you press play, you put your phone in the center console.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you're watching YouTube video, you can click away at any time.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you're pressing play, you put it down. It's actually more work to get your phone out and then scroll through and try to find another episode that you want to listen to.
Yeah.
And most people just won't do it. They'll just let it keep playing because it's more of a hassle to try to change it than it is to just keep listening.
I agree. I want to get your. I want to talk to you about the money is show and get your opinion on this, on your words here. So obviously we started the money is kind of brand to ask that question right there, right? Kind of same format you were going down, right? Like I found my niche, then found what was struggling in my niche, and a lot of times entrepreneurs, business owners struggle with actually really understanding what they want with money. And in business, which you've launched your podcast and launched Guestio, you find out, man, you get kicked in the teeth all the time, and you have ups and downs. And just when you think you're on top of the hill, you go straight back down the hill. And if you don't know what the real reason is, like why you're trying to create this wealth, this success in your life, you end up quitting every time you get kicked down. So we kind of started this episode or the show here based off of this, and so I got your sign right here, and awesome. a great photo of you, and
the rare suit.
It's the nice sport coat you got there, and so you put your answer right here. 1 word, 3 words, it doesn't really matter. You put it here, and then you sign right through here, and then we're going to talk about what that answer is to you.
Great.
You got it?
Yes, sir.
All right, man. Very cool. So answer was, money is a tool. Money is a tool. And I've been called a tool in my life before, but money is a tool. And all right, man, it's a great answer. Talk to me about it, though.
Yeah, it's funny with the background that I have kind of grown up super, super religious, so there's a lot of negative talk about money. And when I kind of got out of that, I started, digesting a ton of content about how money is everything, and money is life, and money is oxygen, and money is all these things. And I kind of ended up somewhere in the middle, where I think that money is basically just a tool. And if you make it more than that, then I think that you are going to suffer in other ways that aren't financial, and in mental health and being happy and being fulfilled. And I think that if you are constantly only pursuing money and nothing else, then that's how, you have some of these guys that commit suicide even though they've had an illustrious career on Wall Street for 25 years. And it's like, but then, you ostracize yourself from your family. You don't have any relationships. You didn't take any time for you. You didn't travel the world. You didn't experience anything. You're only focused on money. But at the same time, if you don't focus on money at all, then you can also have negative effects on your mental health. And so to me, it's just looking at it as a tool. So tools have to be used. Money has to be used. You can't just let it sit there. You can't just randomize your way to money. Anytime I talk to somebody and they're like, one day if I get rich, as soon as I hear the if, I'm like, you're not going to get rich. There's no way that you can make a bunch of money without being absolutely purposeful about it.
Right.
And being extremely disciplined in how you use it and the relationship that you have with it. So to me, it's just a tool. Like, it's a very, very good tool, and I'd rather have a lot of it than a little of it. But at the end of the day, I can't make that the only object of my desire or my pursuit, because I think that just ends in a really empty, kind of lonely type of an existence, which is not something that I want. So I think it's just a tool. It just depends on how you use it. Yeah,
for sure, because it's really the core reason why I started. Because sometimes, especially young entrepreneurs, even myself when I got started, that is all I was doing was just hyper focused on, oh my God, I got to get money, I got to get money, I got to get money. And you're chasing it and you're just like constantly in this pursuit of money.
Yep.
And even when I would get money, it was irrelevant because it was all of a sudden not enough anymore.
Exactly. Yeah,
and
that's the
it was
problem.
like this dead end, like I say dead end road, but I could also say endless road. But at the same time, it was dead end because it felt horrible. Like there was no emotion attached to it. And like you said, money is if you cannot chase it because you'll never get it. And even when you do get it, you're still unhappy. And what you're saying is very true in the sense of money is a tool, like it's a hammer in a toolbox. But unless a hammer is ever used to drive nails in, it has served zero purpose whatsoever. And I think so many times the world that we live in, people do not use the money for what it should be used for. And they leave it sitting in that toolbox and never use it. You're not going to take it home with you. When you die here, no one's gonna be buried in it. They used to bury the kings, I guess, in Egypt with those things. But it's not gonna happen, man. And you got to go use that stuff, or then if you don't use it, then what good is it? Like what actually purpose is it serving if you do not go use that money?
There's the two extremes. It's the people who use it too often for whatever they want and never have any of it. And then it bites them later on in life when they got to keep working and they're 68 years old. But then you have the other people who are just the miserly Scrooges who never keep money flowing. And money needs to flow, man. It's got to be used, or it just kind of sits there, like we were just talking about. And you should be willing to go on that vacation with your family, like go experience that thing that's what makes life rich. You know what I mean? And there's no point in having a ton of money in your bank account if you're not ever willing to go spend it and do some things that are gonna make your life more rich and more fulfilled with experiences and with friendship and with love and those are the other things that really matter.
Yeah, for sure. I want to give you the floor here for a second. For those that are watching right now, that are watching you, you've been talking about podcasts, building a podcast, creating a podcast, your brand, Guestio. These guys are in business. They're investors. They're entrepreneurs. What's some kind of final words of wisdom that you would give them, either A, in business, or B, if you want to get real specific, in why they should even be building a podcast in their business right now? What's some final words of advice you want to give them?
Yeah, for sure. Specifically, if you're watching or listening to this right now and you're an investor, there's no better time investment, I think, than a podcast. There's no way for me to quantify it. That's the problem, right?
Sure,
there's no way for me to. That's why it's difficult to convince people sometimes, because they'll have a negative experience with it or hear of a negative experience with it and be like, well, what about this? And it's like, well, but that's because you were focused or they were focused on the wrong end goal. It's like you have to put it out into the future and look at it as an investment into your future, into your time, into your knowledge, into your learning, into your network, into all of those types of things. Because if you think of it in the long term, there's zero negative effects that it can have. And by the way, if you're doing a show and you're like, but what if I hate it? What if I don't like it? Okay, that's a completely different conversation. If you hate it, if you don't like it, then do one that you would enjoy doing, even if it never led to any sort of money. You know what I mean? That's what we were talking about earlier, is like, look at the end goal. And if you're still struggling with that and just being like, I run this financial firm, but I don't like talking about money in my free time because I talk about it all day at work. And it's like, okay, great, don't do it. Talk about Pokemon cards. Talk about, like your favorite sports team. Talk about basket weaving. Talk about something that fuels you up, fires you up, because at the end of the day, like if you fast forward again the 10 years, like that effect is going to compound in your life like crazy, just like money does. Those small habits of just continued accountable learning in a specific niche or area is going to come back on you tenfold. And once you do it, like you'll start looking back and be like, wow, that came directly from this. That came directly from this. And I know that you would agree with that in terms of like, even if you guys don't monetize your show directly through sponsorships or whatever, there's been a lot of awesome positive effects that have come into multiple businesses that you have just through having a show. Just because it's there. You know what I mean? And it's proven to be worth your time.
What's crazy is like, I just recently taught a class we call the Brand Lab. And as I look back at building the brand, my whole brand was strictly built off of content creation. And with no idea how I was ever going to monetize it. Like I never sat down and said, okay, I'm going to go do this podcast. I'm going to go do this YouTube show. And here's how I'm going to monetize this thing. I had no clue. All I did know was I had to put out content constantly. And I'm sure I made some mistakes, and looking back, I could have did things better, but I would never ever be where I'm at here without just freaking going and shooting stuff and fumbling through it and putting the content out. And then, like you said, I mean, to me, it's not always about monetizing just the show. Because it's what happens before the show, after the show. It's what the connections are made through it, and opportunity is freaking everywhere. Especially if you're doing a show that's interviewing people, it like even magnifies the opportunity that comes from it. And sometimes great relationships are formed, sometimes no relationships are formed, but it's that you're putting yourself out there constantly, to go do it.
I call it engineering luck. Because luck by itself is, by definition, unengineerable. But if you put yourself in a position to get lucky all the time, you're going to find yourself getting lucky a little bit more often than other people who aren't willing to put themselves in positions to get lucky. So, but then other people are going to chalk it up to like, well, you just got lucky. And I was like, okay, yes, that's true to an extent, but also like there were 25 other interviews that I did that didn't end in this direction.
Right,
but I've done like 400 of them now. So like a few of them are bound to end in some pretty solid opportunities.
Right,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? So yeah, I totally agree.
I love it, man. So if they want to follow you right now, this is your podcast on Build Your Network. On any basic platform that's out there on the podcast world. If they want to get involved with Guestio, they just go to guestio.com to either book people and or put themselves out there. If they want to just follow you, Travis Chappell, is there anywhere they get more information on you personally?
Yeah, probably most active on Instagram, which is just at Travis Chappell. That's
just
probably
your full
where
name?
I do.
We'll put it in the notes there.
So it's probably where I do the most content.
Interaction. You got a website about yourself?
TravisChappell.com.
Okay, so you go there
Keep
as
it real
well?
simple, and then all my other social links are there. So if you like LinkedIn or Facebook or any other platforms, you can go find which one you like.
So TravisChappell.com.
Yes, sir.
That's right, man. Man, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I got a ton to learn from you, and you could probably increase my business if I can get your class from you. But anyways, you guys, I hope you enjoyed the show on the Money Is Show with Travis Chappell.